people will always find a way to make sure that folks have accurate information and to mobilize. So when there's more pressure, when there are more barriers, that's when you see more creativity.
I'm here today with Autumn Breon, very fortunately so. Autumn, thank you for being on Urgent Futures.
Oh my goodness, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Me too, me too. Well, you wear many hats, so let's maybe start at the start and walk through who are you?
I am an artist. I'm a native Angelino. My great-grandmother and grandparents migrated here in 1951 from Alabama. I'm also someone that's very fascinated with systems change. I'm an abolitionist, and I'm creative.
Amazing. You referenced your being a native Angelino, and I read that you spent your childhood splitting time between Watts and View Park, and you referenced that being really formative to that identity. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think LA is such a cool place to grow up. It's a fantastic place to live, but there's something very special about growing up here. There are just so many different experiences that exist within one city. And that's like, when it comes to like climate and different like ecosystems, like the fact that you can get from like to the beach to the mountains like in a day is pretty cool. But also like these different like lived experiences from the different neighborhoods in LA. So when my grandparents came to LA from Birmingham, they moved to Watts. And Watts was very different in 1951. And most of their neighbors were other folks that had moved there around the same time. So I got to grow up around these elders that had migrated from like Alabama and Texas and Louisiana. And it was a really, really cool place to grow up and like have a village that's around you. But it was also very close to where the riots were. I remember the riots in the early 90s. And that was a very different experience from View Park, which is close to Windsor Hills, Ladera Heights, Baldwin Hills. A lot of Paul R. Williams architecture in those neighborhoods, which I think is really cool. Not a lot of young people when I was growing up, which was really interesting. So that wasn't necessarily where I like was riding my bike and like skating with people my age. That's the experience that I got to have in Watts. So I'm really appreciative that I had like this like opportunity to kind of like jump and live in different parts of a city all at once. I think that was really critical to how I grew up and saw the world, and also why I was so excited about art and creativity, because my family was like really, really big on just exposing me to different types of art. So going to see plays and musicals and operas with them, my grandmother teaching me the piano, but also like the creativity I was exposed to in the church that my family came to when they came to Los Angeles. So that's where I like sang in the choir and took dance classes and like got to see my grandmother like playing the piano and the organ. So I think that the creativity that I was exposed to in Los Angeles was very pivotal for me growing up as well.
I love all those examples. It sort of strikes me like, from obviously what I'd already known of your work, but then doing research for the episode, I was sort of sussing out particular themes, beyond what you've sort of said in public. And
what did you discover?
Well, I mean, this is a very obvious thing, but it seems that the place plays such an important role in your practice.
Yeah. When I think about place making, and like my early exposure and like experiences around that, I think about the summers that I had with my grandparents and with my family. We would drive from LA to Washington, D.C., across the country every summer. Starting from, I don't know, I don't even remember the first time we drove across the country, but it was just something that was a part of my childhood, something that I expected. And we would go through the South when we were getting to the East Coast, and then come back through the Midwest when we were coming back to California. So it was when I got to see my grandparents, friends, and like family members that didn't migrate to LA, but also the other places that they got to migrate to when they created new places to call home. So the folks that went to Detroit and Chicago and New York, like in the 40s and 50s. And something that was so interesting, I felt like that was probably the first time I experienced time traveling, probably
Mm,
seeing what life was like in like the rural parts of Alabama
mm,
that we would go back to sometimes. That's probably when I got excited about the concept of seeing what different times feel like, but also understanding that you get the agency to pick and choose what will be a part of a place that you call home.
mm,
Because I saw my grandparents do that. I saw my family and their friends do that. And then I did that when I was like in the back of a Roadmaster and living in like different motels and stuff that we would stop in. I was starting to figure out what's essential for a place that I call home, for a place that I feel safe, a place that I feel comfortable. I didn't necessarily have the vocabulary for that then, but I
mm,
think that's when I was observing that and starting to apply it.
mm,
And it's a part of what I use art to model. If I get to create an ideal world, a place where whatever care feels like safety, if I get to create that reality, what are the essentials to make that? Whether it's called home, whether it's called community, whatever. But I know that I'm modeling that with the art that I create, like creating this world and a place that's significant to me.
mm. Yeah, there's people use the word simulation many different ways, but one thing that I've really appreciated about particularly the exhibitions and installations that you've done that I've been able to see physically, but also the ones that I've seen about online, there's this very clear aspect of simulation. Like you're creating a particular microcosm with particular affordances and how like you've created a very clear means of engagement and an evocative way to expose ideas rather than a didactic or a sort of like an essay, which is a great way to communicate with people. But art's doing something different. So it's really fascinating to hear some of the ways in which early travel maybe informed some of that.
Yeah, I'm realizing it as I'm reflecting on it and talking about it because when you invite someone into a space, there's also some power that you have because you get to create some of the rules and the expectations for engagement. So if I'm experimenting with something like a performance or an exhibition where there's certain rules that I make clear, the audience gets to, it's an interesting opportunity that the audience has to kind of reconcile what expectations did I have before I came into this space? What makes me uncomfortable? Or why am I still like reaching for a credit card when I'm engaging with a hot pink vending machine when I'm told that everything is free?
Mm,
Like
mm,
they're fun questions that you get to be in dialogue with yourself about when you learn something through experience instead of being told
mm.
what to do or what to expect. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, you brought it up. I'd love if you'd share a little bit about Care Machine.
Yeah, yeah. You were at the very first Care Machine stop in Inglewood at the Crenshaw Dairy Mart.
It was an amazing experience.
I'm so glad that you could come. And that's an example of like some of those rules of engagement that we get to play around with. So at that exhibition opening, for example, the attire was pinkalicious. Everyone was supposed to wear pink. And people actually did. And you got to kind of see like, oh, okay, like if I've never worn this color before, or if I've never put the effort into thinking about a color that I have to wear to show up, how does it make me feel? What did I choose to wear? The pink was intended to match the Care Machine, which is a pink glowing vending machine. All of the contents are free. And I find out what to put in it by asking Black women what objects remind them of care or provide care. We use the Esoterica hotline to find out what people want in the Care Machine. Planet Esoterica is 300 light years from Inglewood. It's where all of my artwork comes from. The objects come from Planet Esoterica. My performances are rituals and ceremonies from Planet Esoterica. And this planet has beings that send messages and reminders to folks on Earth with reminders of what we need to get through being on this planet before we go on to Esoterica. So the Care Machine is meant to have come through 300 light years of space and time to get to wherever it shows up on this planet. The types of contents that we have are Narcan, lip gloss, edge control, edge brushes, pads, tampons, emergency contraception from Julie, abortion pill resources, everything that can provide care for you or for somebody else if you take something to pass on to somebody else.
You brought up Planet Esoterica, so I want to go deeper there and see if there's any relationship between the narrative and conceptual work that you put into the development of Planet Esoterica and this part of your background that people are maybe less familiar with, which is that you studied astronautics and aeronautics at Stanford. Is there a relationship between those things?
Yeah, totally. I think that I was fortunate enough to like get the training and the education to know some of the science and like vocabulary to use for what I imagined and what I do imagine. I also think that once you're an engineer, that's just a way of thinking that you can apply to just about any system. There's experimentation, especially with art. You always have to start with some type of hypothesis. There's so much collaboration that's essential for putting together artwork. I feel like I'm using so much of what I learned and did as an engineer. I'm just doing it in a different industry now. But yeah, that definitely informs Planet Esoterica. And also just like the interest that I've always had in sci-fi and fantasy. Because the idea is that Planet Esoterica is this other place, but they're concepts that we can apply to make Planet Esoterica wherever you show up. Again, a part of placemaking.
What speculative fiction references are really appealing to you right now?
Ooh. I mean, well, obviously Parable of the Sower.
A little too close.
Well, yeah, for several reasons, especially because we're in Southern California. But also this is the year where Parable of the Sower starts.
I know.
And it feels like it. But Parable of the Sower, all of her work, honestly, even like beyond that series. Jules Verne has always been a big part of like my influence, my reading when I was younger. I really loved A Wrinkle in Time when I was younger, and I think that still influences some of what I make, some of the containers that like the fictional part of my art like can live within.
Can you say more about that? Like, what about A Wrinkle in Time resonated with you as a young person, and how has it informed the work that you've made?
It resonated with me as a young person because I thought this idea of like traveling and living within two places at the same time was so interesting. And I think that's a part of like the active imagination that we all have as young people. Like, I think we always think of like some other place that you might make a name for, that like you travel to, or that might be like, you know, your sanctuary or something like that. I thought it was really special that like this character was traveling like from her home in her backyard, but also that she was traveling like with a mission to find her father and to bring him back. But I really appreciated, I reread the book as an adult recently, and how steadfast she was, despite everyone around her saying like, hey, you know, this is a fool's errand, like this doesn't make any sense. And also the same kind of like commitment and loyalty that she demonstrated with her own family. Like the fact that it was like interpersonal, but also about something that was like so significant and societal and like for saving like all of humanity. I really appreciated that, and I appreciated it when I read it again.
You wrote that your practice investigates the visual vocabulary of liberation through a queer Black feminist lens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Obviously, a lot of the reference points, particularly looking to speculative fiction, when A Wrinkle in Time was being written, weren't putting forward those types of ideas
Mm-hmm.
and advocating for those types of futures. How are you thinking about, drawing what's helpful or positive from, the past of speculative fiction,
Mm.
but also moving into the future with those ends in mind?
Mm. Yeah. That's something that, as someone that consumes art, but also as someone that creates art, that's such a special opportunity that you have to acknowledge what may have been missing from the canon,
Mm,
from the framework, when you started consuming it, when you were inspired, and then what you get to do with that to make it better, or for it to maybe address something that may have been overlooked before. I think that's such like it's something that I take really seriously. Um, I think that there are elements of a lot of the speculative fiction and sci-fi that I was inspired by, even though I would probably put money on the fact that some of the writers were not thinking about queer Black feminist futures.
mm.
There's a lot that I kind of like pick and choose from, like cafeteria style, to make a part of the future that I want to live in. Even like Isaac Asimov, like the gods themselves, Fantastic Voyage. I know that there are definitely pieces of Fantastic Voyage that I use for performances when I think about like what the spacecraft is like that we travel from Planet Esoterica. And it's not always literature. Like a lot of it is like Sun Ra and like Parliament Funkadelic and like the Mothership.
Mm,
All of that really influences what I get to make. And I think that especially P-Funk, that's such an excellent example of taking elements from something that may not have been designed for you to make it bespoke,
mm,
to make it
mm,
achieve what needs to be achieved. So I do that, for example, like when I think about the agency of characters that I admire in work that I've taken in. I definitely use that when I think about how figures show up in my work. When I think about like the worlding of Planet Esoterica, I might pick and choose some of that. When I think about expression through color and like movement of fabric and fashion, I think of the labels.
mm,
I think that that's definitely an example of like a queer Black feminist imagination.
mm.
So a lot of what we have to do is to use what's been given to us, what has existed, and then do the conjuring to make it what it needs to be.
Mm. And Planet Esoterica becomes this space. Like I'm wondering on your creative and conceptual process. Are you building out when you're conceiving of new work? Are you building out from, okay, I want to hit this particular, I have this idea of the thing that I want to say, and where does that fit into what I've built out? Or is it, well, I just did this project and now I'm sitting inside of a certain set of ideas and, oh, I realize I can go deeper on a particular subject? Or is it maybe, a mix of both?
It's a lot of both.
Okay.
It's definitely a lot of both. I'm definitely inspired by my environment. And if I'm like deep into making something where I'm using like a lot of wood, for example, or if there's like a color palette that's a part of what I'm making, that's definitely going to inspire what I imagine to do next. But I don't think that it's always as prescriptive as one or the other, or like one step that I finish first before I move on to the next. But I know that I'm always inspired by my environment.
Mm. We talked about Care Machine earlier,
Mhm.
and that traveled on the Caravan and it had a pilot in Austin. What
Yeah.
was that like?
Yeah. So the Care Machine is traveling this year, and it's a part of an umbrella called the Caravan. And it's basically just like a traveling campaign where the crux of the idea is that accurate information is a form of care. And it's extremely important right now because we're in an election year. So we did this pilot in Austin during South by Southwest. It was so much fun to collaborate with Plan C Pills, Amnesty International, Future Front Texas, For Freedoms, the bodily autonomy work that Jasmine Wahi is doing, Project for Empty Space. It was just really, really special, like to have all of these great minds, these great creatives at the table together. And we put on a care house, which was basically a full day of folks getting access to different types of care. So in addition to accurate information in the form of voter registration, voter guides that people could get, community conversations about how to access abortions and what abortion care looks like in super hostile environments like Texas. But we also had free mini facials for people, tooth gems that folks could get for free. We had a fantastic DJ, a bartender that made drinks that were all pink. It was so much fun. And also like a really intentional space of curated joy, which I think is always important for us. That's how we stay alive, but it's also what we need a lot of this year. There's so many folks that are on the ground doing a lot of important organizing and mobilizing. And as we are all doing that work, it's important that we're taking care of ourselves too. And I think that joy and accurate information, those are all a part of that.
Yeah, can you speak a little bit more to this idea you've talked about radical self-care? Like, in what ways can self-care in particular be a radical act?
Yeah, I mean, we exist within a society where there is not room for us to take care of ourselves intentionally or with like a lot of substance. And that's because of a lot of things, because of capitalism, because of consumerism, because of the patriarchy. There are a lot of things that make it very hard for us to do simple things that are important to us and intuitive, like rest, like eat the right food and eat enough food, getting enough sunlight, all the things that we need to be happy, healthy people. So when, in spite of that, you intentionally make space for yourself and for others to rest, it's a form of resistance. I'm a really big fan of Trisha Hersey. I love what she writes, how she writes about rest as resistance, and that definitely influences how I think about this. But I really like the way that she puts it. I'm paraphrasing, but when she basically says like, this isn't like some like difficult concept or something that we need to learn how to do. It's intuitive and we've been doing it and it's a part of being human. It's just about the conscious choice to maintain that despite the systems that we live within that don't make that easy and that even try to stamp that out.
And how do you, if I may be so bold, how do you, because you do such a wonderful job in your artworks at fostering that for others. How do you bring that into your own practice? Because you are among the busiest people I know, at least from afar.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Coming from a very busy person, right? How do I do it for myself? Trying to practice what I preach, honestly, because it's also like, it's logical. Something that really helps me like with my decision making or like when I'm thinking about how to do something, like most of the time it just boils down to logic and like common sense. I know that I cannot show up as my full self if I'm not taking care of myself. If my well isn't full, I have nothing to pour out from. So as much as I take it seriously to, I don't know, like show up to a meeting on time or make sure that I'm like, prepared before a studio visit, I have to do that for my body. I have to do that for my spirit. I have to do that for my emotions. So sometimes I'll just be like really disciplined about scheduling time for, hey, I know that I finished this deadline or whatever. I have a few hours where I can take a walk outside or I can go hiking and I know that it's good for me.
This overlaps with Don't Use Me. And it was such a joy seeing, that that film, because I know that the project, has a longer life, but it was a joy seeing that film at Salt Eaters a couple years back.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm just going to invite you to sort of talk about what that project was.
Yeah. So Um, it takes Black women 8 months into the next calendar year to earn what a white man did in 365 days. So December 31st, if let's say we were earning the same amount annually, December 31st, whatever you took home, I would have to work until August of the next year to earn what you did. And that's based on me being paid 63 cents on the dollar, Black women on average being paid 63 cents on the dollar. So it's translated into time when you think about how long you have to work into the next year. When I read that and really understood it, like as I was digesting that information, I started to wonder what I would do with 8 months of time, if and when I have that time back. And then when I started to imagine that, I wanted to know what my friends would do. I wanted to know what my mom would do, what my aunts would do. So I shared the question with anybody that would answer. The call and response is always a big part of my work. So I'm usually posing some kind of question and then gathering data through the responses by seeing how other people feel about the same issue, how they may have like imagined something prior to. I'm always really curious about what other folks are thinking about when I learn something new, especially because like with issues like pay inequity, it's so easy to think that it's only happening to you, or to be gaslit into thinking that maybe something isn't really a big deal or you were reading into it too much. And I know that shame thrives in isolation. So I love creative ways to kind of like bring down the walls that would otherwise isolate us. And collecting anonymous responses to questions has been a really interesting way to do that. So people would leave voicemails saying what they would do with their time. They would send text messages. Sometimes they would just share like, you know, like an oral history of, and it was so interesting. It wasn't just about, folks started not just saying what they would do with 8 months of time, but noticing the other Black women in their lives and how much they had to do without a lot of time. So people would tell stories about their mom or their aunts or all sorts of things. I collected all of those responses. I wore them in this huge headpiece. And the first iteration of that performance was at the Walt Disney Concert Hall. So I built a palanquin and was carried by 4 white men. They set me down, and I invited everyone that attended to approach me and read one of the responses, so reading another Black woman's words. And then after that, I did self-portraits where I was acting out what women said they would do with their reclaimed time. And I minted those as NFTs. And with voice.com, I wrote in the women that inspired each self-portrait. I would write them in as a co-creator so that every time the work would sell, even as it sells now, it's a direct action against pay inequity. Those Black women continue to get paid.
You brought up NFTs, and I want to talk about that with you. Obviously, NFTs have, you know, a bit of a the reputation of NFTs is not at its highest point.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about the potential of NFTs now, particularly as it relates to some of your other ends around, you know, pay equity, around liberatory queer Black futures? What's your thinking on NFTs as a zone of possibility?
Yeah. Well, I think of it as just that. I do think that it is a zone of possibility. The technology and the framework is what, again, we have the ability to repurpose and use in unique ways. So I didn't know much about NFTs or blockchain prior to Don't Use Me. I just learned that there was a technology with a permanent ledger and that I could like use like images and like variations of images to exist on this ledger. So I was I an expert in the field? Was I very familiar? No, but there was information I had access to, resources like people and orgs that could answer questions for me and help get me caught up. And then with that information, I could use that as as a vehicle for the art. And I think that's the opportunity that we have with blockchain.
Okay, let's talk about the activist. Well, it's not a hat, but the activist thread to your work. Let's start like at the origin, or if it's kind of plays out over several beats. What do you look back on as maybe the origins of your civic identity and your political identity?
Yeah, I'm glad you said origins, because I don't think that there's just like one seed. My mom worked on Shirley Chisholm's campaign when she was in college. And I thought that was so cool. And Shirley Chisholm was always a hero for me growing up. Like, she was one of my favorite like folks to color in my coloring book that I had. Like, anytime I could do a report, it was on Shirley Chisholm. My grandmother and grandfather, they would, whenever they would get their ballot in the mail, their kids, so my mom, my aunts and uncles, also had their mail sent to my grandparents' house. So everybody would get their ballots at the same time. And we always had dinner together. So leading up to the election, again, this was just something that I knew happened. It was a tradition. Everybody would have their ballot out, and we would talk about the different like measures, propositions, who was running. And with a pencil, we could just like mark up how we were going to vote. Obviously, I wasn't of voting age when I was a kid at my grandparents' house, but I even had like some scratch paper and a little pencil that I got to use so I could participate. And my grandmother made it such a point for the church that's down the street from my grandparents' house, for that to be a place not only where folks could vote, a polling place, but also a place where people could ask open questions about what they were voting for. And she would have candidates come to the house for dinner, and they would, give their stump speech, like talk about the platforms or whatever that they were running on. And then eventually she did the same thing at the church as well. And to this day, Grant AME Church is a stop for politicians, where it's an expectation that you have to stop here to like show face and talk about what you're running for and everything like that. But I think that really informed this idea of how important civic engagement is, but also the fact that it should be joyful and it should be easy to do, and it's for everybody. I think they really shaped that for me.
That makes so much sense, thinking about the work you've done, the kind of like get out the vote work that you've woven into your, sort of art initiatives, but you also, participate in direct action activist ways that, maybe you're bringing your artistic identity to, but they're not meant to, the output is not meant to be art.
I think they inform each other. There's so much creativity that's necessary for organizing, for mobilizing, all of these like significant shifts, these paradigm shifts that we've seen as humans. So like the expectation that a young person should be able to read by the time they're in third grade, like we all know that to be true. 200 years ago, that was nowhere near the norm. But it requires, ending slavery, ideas and tools and concepts like abolition, but then like the actual tools like the Underground Railroad, those require such significant imagination, creativity to execute, collaboration with finding other people to understand this crazy idea and to help you reach it as well. There's so much creativity that's required. I think that it makes so much sense for there to be a symbiotic relationship between civic engagement, attempting paradigm shift, and art. They really do support each other. So when I'm supporting, for example, Where Is My Land? Kavon Ward is the founder of Where Is My Land, and she's the one that led justice for Bruce's Beach, for that land in Manhattan Beach to be returned to the descendants. She's doing the same thing in Santa Monica now with Ebony Beach Club. There's so much creativity, and she's an artist too. She's a poet. So it makes so much sense that you see these creative individuals doing this significant work that the rest of society benefits from. So when I get to support with my own creativity, I'm honored to do so, and I feel like I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing.
Mm. Do you feel like in siloing particular types of work, we're losing the opportunity for that type of creative, artistic way into civic or political conversations?
Oftentimes, for sure. Think about how many folks I'm sure you've heard say that certain political issues are complicated, or sure, like you could probably understand it if you're a political scientist or whatever. Yeah, I think that unfortunately, so many of us have been socialized to believe that these silos are real
Mm.
and that we benefit from them when we really don't. I think there's so much opportunity for cross-pollination, for learning from each other, and honestly, an opportunity to get to solutions much quicker when we can eliminate these silos.
Mm. Body sovereignty has been a big theme for you. I'm just curious if you could speak to that, and then we can, kind of go deeper from there.
Yeah. It so many of these things that are like a big deal now. Um, Again, it's what's so frustrating is that it's not logical to make bodily autonomy something significant. Like
Mm.
so many of these things just seem like so basic and honestly like distractions
Mm.
sometimes
Mm.
that it's frustrating that like we're at a point like on our human timeline where like we're criminalizing things that were not criminalized before, that don't benefit us, and where we see the negative repercussions real time.
Mm.
So yeah, bodily autonomy is something that's really significant and that I've been doing a lot of work around. But the motivation for doing the work, honestly, is because like I don't want to be talking about this like in 10 years, 20 years from now. Like this isn't something that we should have to waste time on.
Mm.
A lot of the work that I do is around access to safe abortions. Um, and that's a lot of what inspired me digging deeper into this idea of accurate information as a form of care,
Mm.
because I think of having access to abortions, to emergency contraception, to healthcare. These are all just forms of care that we all need, and it shouldn't be something that like your socioeconomic status, or even like what part of the country you're in. It makes no sense for that to influence your access to care.
Mm.
So we live in a reality in which it's very hard for a lot of folks to get abortions right now, where folks don't have access to accurate information. So when there are efficient solutions like abortion pills that you can access by mail that are still legal right now, it only makes sense for me to find ways to amplify that and to make sure that more folks have access to it, because someone's life shouldn't be jeopardized
Mm.
just because they didn't know about accurate information.
Mm.
And I know too many folks that aren't alive now, or that have had to make decisions that no human should ever have to weigh, only because they didn't have access to resources like information.
Mm.
So if there's simple ways like putting abortion pills in a traveling vending machine to make sure that more folks have access to what they need, it only makes sense.
Mm. What did you observe? I mean, you talked earlier about creating a moment of reflection in terms of how you comport yourself or how you behave in a particular space of like, oh, why am I pulling out a credit card at a vending machine I know is free?
Mm-hmm.
But specifically related to the Plan C pills, did you have a chance to observe how people reacted when they saw that this was something free in a vending machine in like in an art activist experience?
Yeah. I've seen people be very grateful. I've seen folks, I get really excited when I see people take some that they can give to a friend
Mm.
or that they can have available for other folks. Yeah, I've seen obviously some folks that are like uncomfortable or upset or whatever, but I'm more excited when I see folks actually using the resource. And what's really interesting to me, when I see folks that never knew about abortion pills,
Mm.
it's really special. You know, like when, like if you have a favorite book and you pass by somebody that's reading it for the first time, the kind of excitement, like that secondhand excitement that you get to have.
Mm.
It's really special when people find out that this is something that's accessible, that exists already. That's a really special feeling. But then the unfortunate part is just like, like what if you had known earlier? How many
Mm.
other folks don't know, you know?
Mm.
But that magic, because it really does feel like magic, the magic of knowing that there is a simple solution that exists and you have access to it. I think that's really special.
Mm. I want to open up to more of your thoughts around information as a form of care. I think that's such a potent phrase, and I want just to invite you to speak more to that.
Yeah. I really believe that when folks have access, I believe that when most people, when they have access to accurate information and when they really get to experience understanding something, that they will make a decision that benefits society. I really think that will influence decision making in a positive way. Care and safety are very related. And I think that accurate information is a part of creating that community of safety, because we have to, if we're going to feel safe somewhere, a part of that is being able to safely say like what you don't understand, right? And having access to kind of get from that place of like a lack of understanding to fully understanding and being able to use that information. So it's like a whole community of safety that accurate information contributes to.
I love that.
I'm not the first one to do this. All of the work that folks are doing right now to make sure that we keep each other safe, that's not brand new either. We have always found ways to make sure that folks can get to abortion safely, to make sure that folks, even when it was like midwives whose job it was to provide abortions, we always found ways to do that. And I think it's important that we remember, as hostile as the environment is right now, which is very real, that's not something to overlook, we're always going to have a way to take care of each other and find ways to do so.
That connects with this thread that I want to pull in your practice around memory and around histories, particularly ones that are forgotten or erased. And, you know, that some projects of yours that come to mind are Biddy and Leisure Lives, but of course there's many ways that threads throughout. So I want to throw that into the mix.
Yeah. I really enjoy history and learning about history. I would say that when I'm not reading sci-fi, I'm probably reading historical fiction or sometimes like old essays lately. But yeah, I just love learning about these histories, especially the ones that are sometimes forgotten or overlooked. And I'm always interested in why it's forgotten or why it's intentionally not included in a lot of like what we learn in traditional spaces. So Leisure Lives was a performance and installation that I did for Frieze in 2023. And that was the first time that Frieze was in Santa Monica. So I was curious about the history of Santa Monica. It's really important for me when I'm doing something that's site specific to know a lot about that location and that specific site. So Santa Monica used to have a black beach. It was called the Inkwell, and that's interesting because there are a lot of black leisure sites that are near water, the ones that showed up like turn of the century, also early 20th century, that were called the Inkwell. And it was because folks thought that the water turned black when black bodies got into it. So that's why there's an Inkwell in Massachusetts. That's why Santa Monica was called the Inkwell. But the folks that lived there called it Bay Street Beach. And it was a black neighborhood. There were black resorts. Folks started buying homes closer to the water. And it was around the same time that you saw what was happening in Manhattan Beach at Bruce's Beach. What I find so interesting about Bruce's beach, Willa Bruce was the woman that actually bought the property. Her husband was a Pullman porter, so he was always on the road. She was the one that was actually managing the operations and everything. A part of why she was able to get the land was because nobody wanted beachfront property then. It was uneven land to build on. It wasn't considered like a really attractive place to live. Willa Bruce made something significant out of what she was dealt and built up Bruce's Beach, and other Black families started coming and buying homes and building community in the same neighborhood. So something very similar was happening in Santa Monica. Eminent domain was used to shut down a lot of the developments that were coming up then. So I wanted to honor this history that's actually pretty recent in Santa Monica, but also dig deeper into this idea of leisure. So a lot of what we were talking about with Trisha Hersey's work in Rest is Resistance, and also the history of these leisure sites, where there were so many of them in California and also in different parts of the country. But if we saw that our ancestors, our elders, when they were making new places to call home, when they were seeking safety, creating safety, if leisure, places near the water, opportunities to play at the beach, for there to be dance halls near the beach, if that was a part of what was important for them in a place that they called home, that's just another reminder that this is something that's good for us. It's a way that that we keep ourselves safe and that we are fully realized humans. So in addition to understanding this history, I also wanted to understand, if we think of leisure not as a destination, but something that you make time for all of the time, where does that leisure live? Where are you doing that already? So I invited people to answer that question. And in this archway that I built, I included their responses on the back. The front had this neon cursive that said "Leisure Lives," but the idea was that it's like a new type of monument. So honoring the people that so fiercely protected leisure when they were building up Bay Street Beach, but also honoring the ways that we make time for our leisure all the time. So making it very individual, and also for how we think of ourselves as a group. Yeah, but doing that research was really interesting. And also, like, I love seeing like the archival images and like old newspaper clippings when you see these beaches that were developing in Southern California. That was really fun to research.
And what about Biddy?
Yeah, Biddy Mason. I worked with Four Freedoms. I worked with the good folks at Kinfolk, and I was invited to imagine a monument in Los Angeles. And as I was thinking about like whose history I would want to dig deeper into, and who I could make more folks aware of that they may not have been aware of, and also that site specificity that we were talking about. I thought about Biddy Mason. She was enslaved and was a part of a wagon train that came from the South to what's, they made their way to Utah first. And then she found out that once she made it to California, that she would be free, and her children. She had to walk most of that distance. And she was trained by midwives when she was growing up. So she knew like plants and roots to use for folks' ailments. So it was her job to like pitch tents, break down tents, take care of people when they were sick. She had like an infant when she was making this trek. So she found out that she and her children would be free. She took her master to court, won the case, got her freedom and her kids' freedom, started working as a nurse in what's now Los Angeles. She started buying property. Most of the property that she owned is what's now downtown Los Angeles. She hosted these dinners. She was well known in like LA society. Politicians would be at her house all the time. Um, she's the one that acquired the land that became First AME Church, that's still here in LA. Um, and there's only one photograph of her. So I didn't have a lot of imagery to go by when I was working on this sculpture with kinfolk. And for folks that aren't familiar with kinfolk, obviously I know you are. Um, it's imagine Pokemon Go, but history. So you can walk around anywhere, pull out your phone, you use the app, and these different monuments and the stories and the context show up wherever you are. So we could pull up Biddy Mason right now in the parlor, and then you'll see the story of Biddy Mason. So with that app, actually, I've pulled up Biddy Mason in Kigali, in Amsterdam. I had her like on the canals in Amsterdam. She's been in Paris. She's been in DC. She's gone all over, but it makes sense because we get to reimagine monuments. I don't know if monuments should just be made out of marble and static and stuck in one place. Like even Biddy Mason's story is dynamic. So if we were to think of how to depict her, I don't think that it should just be something that's stuck in one place. So I worked with the kinfolk team, and I didn't want her standing up the way you typically see someone with a monument. I mean, most of the monuments that we've been tearing down are somebody like sitting on the back of a horse. They aren't imaginative at all. So I wanted Biddy Mason to be lounging. So I have her kind of relaxing like this, and she's looking off into the distance like she's daydreaming. And her hair is adorned with different flowers from the different places that she migrated through and lived throughout her life. So they're flowers from Mississippi, from Texas, from California. And I thought, you know, if Biddy Mason got to see the fruits of her labor and what this city is now, everything she contributed to, what it is now, I would want her to be resting. And that's how I think of her when I imagine her. So it was really special to work with kinfolk. And I got to do this performance where I invited people to share their stories of how they came to Los Angeles, and made these cool, like, short little videos with photographs that they shared, talking about their journeys to LA or their ancestors or elders' journey to LA. So some folks talked about how they came in the back of a trunk to cross the border, or how they moved here, thought they would be here for a couple of years for grad school, but fell in love, and now they're living here and have been for decades. All sorts of stories. And then those were shared out loud at Grand Park when we showed Biddy Mason for the first time and did this performance. And it was really special because it's a few blocks from where her home was.
I love the visual of her in rest, in leisure, to communicate her power. Like that's not necessarily something that people would think about visually as being, you know, what signifies power.
Yeah. And then I think the question that should exist in that dialogue is, how do you visualize power? And if it's someone standing up, or if they have like a menacing face, why? Like, where did that conditioning come from? Where did you see it? Does it actually make you feel like someone's powerful? Or is that just communicating that they're more powerful than someone else and not necessarily powerful on their own?
Let that one sit for a second. Well, speaking of power and people wanting to wield power over other people, how are you feeling? It's an election year. I mean, in the world, it's like half the world is experiencing elections. Yeah. But it's a U.S. election, and it's a complicated one.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
You know what? We see so much news about how folks aren't engaged for this election. all of the work that needs to be done for folks to care. But I'm actually really encouraged. And I'm not just saying that to convince myself. But again, like, people will always find a way to make sure that folks have accurate information and to mobilize. So when there's more pressure, when there are more barriers, that's when you see more creativity. And I've seen the way that I have seen young people mobilizing, honestly, that's what has me excited and encouraged about this year. Something that's really interesting that I learned from vote.org. They are really good at data. That's one of their expert areas. And something that they were sharing is basically what's going to make this election and where we're seeing folks getting their information, sources that they trust. It's not always the news, print, television. It's actually folks that they know, that they trust, that they're getting information from. So those might be influencers, those might be friends, community leaders, but that's where a lot of people are getting their information and where they're influenced. And I've seen people getting really creative with how they're making it so clear to folks that we have no choice but to be engaged, and to get the person next to you engaged and showing up to vote as well. Local elections are what excite me most election years. That's where we get to see like the effects of the choices that we make more immediately. And the folks that are running for office, the folks that are mobilizing, I'm really inspired by what I've seen so far. And I think that we're just going to see more creativity leading up to November.
How are you feeling about the proposed TikTok ban? Because obviously TikTok plays an important role in how young people in general get information, but it's also a place where particularly like progressive ideas are shared in this creative way that you're describing.
I think that there's always going to be some kind of tool, again, especially young people, that young people will use, whether something is banned or not. There will be another version of TikTok, or like more generally, like means of communicating information in short, snippy ways to folks that you want to have listening to you. I think that young people will always find a way to do that.
I love to hear that. You referenced Four Freedoms, and I don't think I ever stopped to ask you to explain who Four Freedoms is.
Yeah. Four Freedoms is an incredible organization that exists at the intersection of art and civic engagement. And the Four Freedoms Congress that was in 2020 was when I met so many other artists, curators, folks that are in this creative ecosystem that have that same kind of relationship that we were talking about between civic joy and art. So they have supported so much of the work that I've created, and also just like inspired me in the form of there being a network of folks that are thinking about the world in the same kind of way, centering joy, creating opportunities for engagement, and making sure that it's done in a beautiful way. I think that's a good way to sum up Four Freedoms.
I think there's a thread in contemporary art that is opposed to things like, overt beauty, or having a very direct message embedded in your work, and being too prescriptive about what that is. Four Freedoms bucks that in a number of different cases. So I want to open that can of worms up.
Yeah, I think those imaginary silos that we were talking about, Four Freedoms, I really admire the way that Four Freedoms doesn't even acknowledge or make space for those types of like barriers to entry among folks, which is why it the message is so clear that everyone can come to play and that everyone is creative. And I think that's especially important when we have a lot at stake like we do this year. It's going to require a lot of creativity for us to see change. And for there to be a lot of creativity, everyone has to recognize that they can create. If you were created, you can create something. And there's creativity that we use every day. So For Freedoms really makes space for that and amplifies how artists do that. And I think as a result of that, these standards that exist within contemporary art, I predict that a lot of them won't be standards in the future because we're seeing more and more examples and models of why that's not true and how we need plurality when it comes to beauty. We need different ways for beauty to show up and to think of beauty not just as something that looks good, but the conjuring that we were talking about, where what do you make with something that you are dealt?
For folks who might hear that and still feel skeptical that either they are able to participate in those creative ways, or folks in contemporary art or aspiring artists who think like, I'm really drawn to what you're saying, but I'm trying to make a career over here and play by these particular rules. What advice might you give those folks, or what invitations might you make for shifting that thinking?
I would say when we have complicated problems, we need creative solutions. And we have lots of complicated problems right now. And again, logically, if you just think about the idea of like only a select few being able to hypothesize and execute solutions for everybody's problems, that doesn't make any sense. And we're never going to get anywhere. So we need like as much to like throw on the wall as possible. That would be my invitation for those that are skeptical of their creativity. And what was the second one? Folks that think like
who may be trying to pursue a career and play by the rules of
art.
Yeah, of art. Art with scare quotes.
Because they want a career, right? I would say learn all the rules. That's important. Learn all the rules. A mentor told me this. Learn all the rules so that you can know which ones to break and how to break them. So I do think it's important to understand what the rules are. But yes. But if you're trying to make a career out of being an artist, if you want to be an artist, what should be most important is whatever message you need to put out into the world. That's what should take priority. So my invitation would be to consider what message is important to you that the world has to know about while you're on this planet. Start there and then figure out how you get that message out. But your message should be more important than any rules.
Speaking of messages, do you think of Planet Esoterica as a utopia?
No. I don't know if utopias exist. And I don't know if I would want Planet Esoterica to be a utopia, if that even was possible. No, it's an experiment. It's absolutely an experiment. I think that it's a very transparent experiment in which folks are invited to participate in it, but there's no finite outcome. It's a completely iterative experiment in which elements of utopia exist at times.
And you feel like they come into existence through the experiment, or you're thinking that you're building in those elements as a container?
They come into existence through the experiment. So because there's so many, because of all of these beings that exist within this planet that are experimenting and constantly inviting others to experiment with them, every now and then you might see something similar to utopia or see elements of a utopia, but I don't think that it's permanent because esoterica is consistent, perpetual experimentation.
I love that. I feel like we've covered a lot of stuff. but I also feel like there's so much more that we could and should be talking about. So I want to ask you, is there something particular in mind right now that is absorbing a lot of your attention, or that you feel like connects to work that you've done that's worth getting into conversationally
Oh, that we haven't talked about
that we haven't
yet.
talked about yet? Or connected to, but, extending.
Yeah. Mm. Um, when we were talking about overlooked histories and memories and leisure, um, I thought about protective style, this body of work, and how it was inspired by the overlooked history of Bernice Robinson, which is also inspired, she's inspired a lot of my work around accurate information, recreating third spaces. She was a hairdresser, and she did not vote. She didn't have the opportunity to vote until she moved to New York from South Carolina. She came back when she needed to take care of her parents that were getting older. And it was a stark contrast from living in Manhattan.
Mm.
So she went to a Highlander school retreat, which is one of the oldest folk schools in America. And it was the first time that she was able to break bread with white folks, like have meals and have like these dialogues and debates with white people. Um, she loved the retreat so much, loved everything that she was learning. At the same time, organizers were trying to figure out how to get Black folks to pass literacy tests so that they could vote, back when you had to prove that you could read and write in order to vote. So she volunteered to teach reading and writing from her hair salon. And it worked so well, 80% of her students would pass the course in a few months, be able to read and write, pass these literacy tests. And even her pedagogical approach was, I think, really significant, because instead of using like, I don't know, like hop on pop books or whatever, she was using like Sears catalogs and canned food that was already like in these folks' kitchens. So she didn't want to be condescending in teaching an adult the same way you would teach a child, but she also was practical in the sense of using objects as learning materials that they were already around every day. So it worked really well. It scaled to other salons that also started having these secret classes in their salons. Folks were getting registered to vote for the very first time in their lives. But what I thought was so special about this, so many things are special about it, but the fact that I know something special happens in hair salons. I have a hair and nail salon within my studio. So I'm around like the smells and sounds of a salon a lot.
Mm.
I know that something special happens there, other than just like getting your hair cut or whatever. Like there's something special that happens in third spaces like that.
Mm.
And it's incredible that she used that third space in a way that I never would have like imagined on my own. But I also find it fascinating that a part of the success was that a hair salon was hidden in plain sight. No one expected mobilizing to be happening within hair salons. And also, all of her suppliers were other Black businesses. She knew who her mail person was. So once the state made it illegal to be an NAACP member after Brown v. Board, she told folks that were afraid to continue their membership with the NAACP, like, hey, don't worry about it. Just change your mailing address. Have like your membership and like, your copy of the Crisis magazine sent to my salon, because I know who my mail person is. And that way people didn't have to be afraid of being fired if they were teachers or like worked for the state. So yeah, that kind of genius I just find so beautiful. It's just like a simple elegance to make something work. her history and all of the work that she did got me thinking about beauty in that different kind of way. And it also inspired finding creative ways to get folks the accurate information that they need, because that's what she was doing. So we honor the legacies of folks like that when we find a way to get somebody what they need. And like we do it already. Like, it's not rocket science. Like,
You would know.
like when you move to a new city, right? Like or you'll ask around, or somehow you'll find out, like, I don't know, like, where should I get coffee now? Somebody will share that accurate information with you if they care about you. Or like, hey, I'm looking for a new dentist. Like, we have like these hacks and systems to spread information already.
Well, it really strikes me that it's genuine innovation. I think there's this, like, techno-utopian, patriarchal way of describing innovation as something that's always looking out into the distance. And what you're describing is innovation that's occurring in real time among people. Like, it's having a real impact on people right now. And there's nothing hypothetical about it.
And it's from within. It's not looking outward or looking somewhere else. It's looking with what you have and then building from there.
You brought up third space. Obviously, this is a very sort of buzzy topic at the moment, but some people might not know what that means.
Yeah. Not where you work and not where you live. So places like parks are third spaces.
And do you see your performance and installation practice as facilitating third spaces, even if it is taking place in very sort of short-lived moments?
Absolutely. Even if it's temporary, for sure. Like the care house, for example, and like when we recreate that in different places, even if it's only for a day or a few days, it's recreating that, and then again, hopefully encouraging the viewer to recreate and seek that in different places.
One thing I realized I did want to ask you that I had forgotten to, what do you see as the potential of performance?
As I think about like oppressive spaces that are more and more prevalent as we talk about third spaces, actually, and how that's already impacting performance and performers. So like drag bands, for example, like we're seeing legislation and like these flawed cultural expectations that impact how we perform and where we perform, different types of performers. I think that's going to impact performance. I think that we'll probably see like unique places that people will create interventions for performance and to address the context that exists around performance right now. I also wonder, I think about like durational performances in different parts of history. So like the like dance competitions that were about like how long folks could dance, and then the winner was the person that like danced for the longest or whatever. I'm wondering like what kind of impact we'll see on that type of performance, like how durational performance might look interesting. Especially because like we're almost at a point where like, I mean, maybe this has always been the case, but like the act of, we've survived so much recently when we think about the pandemic, like the reckonings that we've witnessed firsthand, like in rapid succession. I wonder how that's going to impact how we think about durational performances when it kind of feels like existence is a durational performance.
Do you feel like our sense of, I don't know, like hyperbolic expression or performed expression is different because of what we've witnessed over the past few years?
Probably. Probably. I would think so because it's like it's almost like we've lived through hyperbole. Like we've seen like the exaggerated like magnifications of some issues. Like we've seen like the worst of the worst and the best of the best.
Mm,
So I think that probably has informed our expression already. It would make sense.
mm. I agree with you. I have questions that I like to ask every guest.
Yeah.
So you've touched on things that could be the answers to these questions. So if you want to call those answers back in for these answers,
Okay.
that's totally welcome. But what is one thing you wish people paid more attention to?
Mm, how your body reacts um, to objects, sounds, to stimuli, like actually paying attention to what your body feels when you
Mm,
react.
mm. What is one resource you use to make sense of reality or that you recommend?
Mm, a good journal.
Mm,
So my own thoughts, a place to record my thoughts and my reactions
mm.
and my feelings.
And we talked earlier about Muji pens. I don't know if those rise to the level of recommendation, but
I mean, well, yeah, you need, if you have a good journal, you need something to write with. And a Muji pen is a great way to make sense of the world when you're writing things down.
brought to you by Muji.
Right.
Um, and finally, what is one moment when your sense of reality was disrupted?
Mm. Wadi Rum in 2022.
Could you share a little bit more about that? Because it's
Yeah,
an
yeah,
amazing experience.
yeah. I did this really, really incredible artist residency through one of many studios. My friends Noor and Britt facilitated this really special residency, and we were in Wadi Rum, which is really special because it's the desert. It's where the landscape is very familiar because it's been in so many films. So it's where Dune was filmed, Star Wars. It feels otherworldly,
Mm,
just like when you're walking around and when you see it. But it's also special because it's one of the deepest points of the earth. So it's like you're in the earth's womb, and it's also a really significant uh, geographically because it connected so much trade, that part of the world. Um, and the sunrises and sunsets are really, really special there. And I was able to do a performance, another iteration of "Don't Use Me," actually.
mm,
So all of my time that I got to spend in Jordan was incredible. But and I was with these artists that also came out that were from so many different disciplines. And it was so cool to be able to learn from them and to make work with them.
mm.
I really enjoy creating an environment when I'm around other people. Like I said, there's like a hair and nail salon in the studio, so sometimes just like the sound of hearing other people like chatting or making, I find that really comforting. So it was really special to be in the desert with some incredible artists and to be able to share my work while I was there.
Mm. The show is called Urgent Futures, and obviously there can be, you can read that with alarm. I only see alarm as one part of a broad spectrum of urgency. So thinking about everything we've talked about today, what are aspects of emerging futures that feel urgent to you?
Um, Information spread, like the tools that we're going to come up with to get accurate information to each other, because yeah, they're bans that we're dealing with right now, but that's literally just like a blink within like the timeline of like how long we're going to be here and like the impact that we're going to see from decisions that are made now. So there's always going to be a lot of the resources that we need. will most likely be outlawed, banned, difficult to access if we rely on the government, other oppressive systems and powers that be. So it's urgent that we identify and experiment with creative ways to get information to each other, because we're only going to need more and more of that in our future.
Solidarity. Autumn, this has been an amazing conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank
this
you
was so
so
much
much.
fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for being on the show.
Yes.
This podcast is edited and produced by Adam Labrie and me, Jesse Damiani. The podcast is presented by Reality Studies. You can learn more by visiting realitystudies.co. And if you appreciate the work I'm doing, please subscribe and share it with someone you think would enjoy it.